so inspired. Would like to know something more about you from you.
In the nutshell, I mean, I've been a creative director, a writer, editor for the last 25 years, commissioning books and TV series and all. But there's an underlining thread in all of that. And that is what, I love to introduce myself only as a storyteller, period. End of it. And I've been in love with stories for God knows when. If you believe in reincarnation, perhaps I was born with stories. So being there, done that kind of a thing. If you are a book lover, I've been reading like mad since a young age. Like we mentioned, I don't know if it was pre-recording. I come from Madhya Pradesh and proudly MPite. And being while traveling to different cities, because my father retired from State Bank, we'd had a varied experience. Apart from forming newer friends, the best friend that you always carry from one place to another when you get transferred are the books. Those days, these days, of course, there are movies, there are internet and so on and so forth. But those days, I'm talking about 80s and 70s, 80s and 90s. Books were your greatest companion. And I've been a mad reader, a voracious reader all along. And even in the career, you see that if you my academics, I see that I started with management in my graduation. Undergrads, I did management, but never did MBA. Unlike everyone else, I branched into literature because that was always my love. And literature has always been my love. So did my MA literature, did a few years of sales jobs, but eventually realized that this is not what this lifetime is for. This lifetime has to be dedicated to stories. What else do you do? You can write novels sitting at a place like Bhopal, or perhaps come over to a place like Mumbai, which is like the happening place to be. So I landed up in Mumbai in 96. And since then, this is the home. And can't be anything, there's no better home than this. Trust me. And Mumbai has been a great caretaker and a benefactor and whatnot. Words really elude me. So I've been into varied fields, into publishing, into television, now dabbling into web, which is a newer form. But in all this, like I said, it's to dabble with stories, whether to commission stories for somebody else's novels, commission stories for picture books, commission stories for comics in Amar Chitrakatha or Space Toon, or for that matter, for television series while I was with Prayas Production, or later on as a scriptwriter. Stories have been encompass my life. So there's nothing else. If you take stories away from my life, I think Rajesh Iyer is hollow. There's nothing there in me except for stories. So I'm filled with stories and yet greedy to know more, read more, listen to more stories and tell as many stories as I know. So in nutshell, that is my journey starts with storytelling and story listening, and hopefully will end whenever it does with a story in my lips and my heart and mind. So
as a creative director, of serials, then as editor of magazine, a screenplay writer and writer of novels, how did this amazing journey happen? You shifted. I cannot say shifted, but transformed yourself from one role to another role. How was this journey? How did this happen?
I wouldn't say it's very deliberate. Let's be very honest about it. It's not deliberate. It also comes from, I don't know whether I've used the word, perhaps in my introduction, I might have used the word greed. I am greedy about stories. Just greedy. There are no better words to describe me. मुझे एक लालच है कहानियां सुनने का, कहानियां बोलने का, कहानियां जानने का. That greed actually propels you to go to multiple fields. Then you realize you have an ability to write in English. And the first thing that comes to mind way back in 90s, apart from obviously writing novels, which is of course a very, very lonely kind of a thing, which doesn't have a very corporate structure to it, or magazine. So I edited magazines, which are not part of my thing. I edited perhaps little-known magazines. So a music magazine, a fashion magazine, and all these things. This was happening alongside my television thing. So the first thing was when I realized that I had to go from Bhopal to Mumbai, I realized that I had to actually do something. If I had to be in television industry, film industry, कुछ script तो लिख के जाऊँ, कुछ तो लेके हाथ में लेके तो जाऊँ. Otherwise, what do I do? Go knock at whose place, and say that I'm a writer. You can't say that. For an actor, at least you take the photographs and give it to them. What do you do? So I started writing scripts. That's how the transformation actually happened for script, because that was my entry point. Initial days were more of being a creative director rather than because as a writer, because invariably mid 90s were more that you had to actually assist a established writer, which I refused to do for whatever reasons. I said I don't want to be an assistant writer or work under a writer. I'd rather get in as a creative director when I'm involved in creating programs for the channel, talking to the channel, interacting with them from the production. So that's how the journey started. So to answer, getting back to your specific question is because it was more need-based. One was, of course, the greed to be involved with stories and into multiple folders. And two, that became the entry point kind of a thing. Television was happening. It was ripe. 92, 93 was when satellite has come in. So this was like big things were happening. And of course, much later, the 2000s onwards, the millennium onwards, the things kind of like exploded in a different way. But that's where I kind of like stepped into one audiovisual and one into another stream into publishing. So all my life, there was this dichotomy. Everyone felt, boss, you seem to be a confused guy. ये करना है या ये करना है. So मैं बोला ये भी करना है और ये भी करना है. It looked like there were times that I had self-doubt. I would not deny that. It's been a very long journey. And I had started out in 91 to decide कि मुझे कुछ नहीं करना लाइफ में, सिर्फ घर पे बैठ के नॉवेल्स लिखना है, उसमें से पैसे आ जाएंगे more than sufficient. But it only happened, my novel only happened after I had commissioned nearly 600 books. I had commissioned over, tens and 50s of stories in television and, for web or for animation. मेरा journey जो culmination है 1991 से, my book was published when my novel actually as a writer was published in 2016. So it took me 25 years.
Oh.
Till the time I was into, but that is a learning experience. So I keep, there are times I say, look back and say, did I waste so much of time looking into other people's script, helping others? Had I thought about in 90, then I look back and say, look, Usain Bolt, 10 second का रहता उसका, 9 second का run dash रहता, 100 meters का, Olympics में. It's just the 9 second. But he practices for 4 years. The 9 second matters because that 4 years of practice also makes all that difference. So I guess I give myself the solace. Santana deta hu apne aap ko ki that 25 years that you put in, we're going to reap benefits over the period of time. So I am now slowly kind of like seeing results of it. Some of them like seeing things happening because not just from the book point of view, now also since I've come from television and film, the idea is to transport them into the audiovisual medium. I cannot declare which production house I've signed, but I've signed my first novel, the film rights for the first novel very recently, last month. So there is things culminating into that. So that actually helped. So working in publishing as well as working in television and films and audiovisual, it has not been contradictory. As many pointed out to me, as in my moments of self-doubt, I thought it is contradictory. It is not. Trust me, it is not. It's actually only helped me as a storyteller per se. So
great.
It's like it's been a wonderful thing, could dabble in both. So one of the gentlemen I met in Bhopal was a man who's retired from, I forgot his name, and just 10 minutes that I met. But I say, God bless his soul, God bless him, wherever he is, in whatever form he is. He gave me such a beautiful nugget. I pass it on to all writers all the time. I'll just tell you this story. This is an anecdote in my life, since it's just about a storyteller. So I might as well tell you a story. So somebody introduced me and said, why don't you go and meet him? He will guide you because he was in Hindustan Times and for 25, 35, 40 years, he'd worked as an editor. He'll guide you. So he said, what had you done before you were doing MA literature? So I said, I was into marketing. I studied marketing. They said, tell me about marketing. So just newly studied marketing. So you try to pretend you know everything, So I said, marketing mix, 4 P's of marketing mix, product, price, promotion. So I don't know whether he whipped it up immediately, knowing that 4 P's, or it was always there to a coincidence. He said, to succeed in life, I can't tell you how we'll go about what life you take, because I'm not a novelist. I've been a journalist. You say you don't want to be a journalist, you want to be a novelist. But there are 3 P's in life that will always be important. I tell all the writers. He said, prayer, patience, perseverance. He says, without any of these P going away, it'll never work. prayer is wanting that deep desire to do something. If that want, वो जज्बा जब तक नहीं होना कि that desire to do, it gives you sleepless nights. I want to write, I want to do something, I want to create a story. There's a story that's boiling inside. That's the prayer. That's you wanting to do something there. So secondly is perseverance. You got to be keep going, keep happening, keep doing it. And the third is have infinite amount of patience, because things will not materialize overnight. And he said to me at that time in 1991 or 92, I think, he said, since you want to be a novelist, and novelist is a very tough ask to accomplish, that thing has to be done with a lot of patience. It could be years, it could be a lifetime. And I clearly remember that. And I have virtually given a lifetime. And I said, whatever it is, I have to. So I see one of, I think Jamna has said, passion. Passion comes, I'll just add to that. Passion comes as part of a prayer thing. The prayer is that wanting to do, a deep desire is what it is. So yeah, thank you. So this 3 P's has held me in good state. And whenever I'm down, I keep telling all the writers, you say 5 साल में चीजें नहीं बैठी, अरे मुझे 25 साल लगे सर, मैं 25 साल तक लोगों के लिए, I was doing a corporate job, big deal. I didn't want to be a CEO in a company. I was there and I half-heartedly doing it. I didn't want to be chief editor because ultimately I want to be a writer. And what did it take me? It took me 25 years. So I tell people, 5 साल कुछ नहीं है, 10 साल कुछ नहीं है, 15 भी नहीं है, मैं तो बोलता हूँ 25 भी कुछ नहीं है. There's still life out there. Like Browning said, I still am a literature student. So Browning, there's this beautiful line, grow old along with me, for the best is yet to be.
So according to you, what is the essential difference, in the way storytelling happens in the different formats? Like, in novel, storytelling is different, serial, it is different, and cinema, it is different.
Assuming, let's look at start from novel per se. There is a person out there sitting. The first most important thing, there's also something we must add is compare all of this with oral storytelling. That's very important, because I always give great precedence to oral storytelling. These wandering minstrel, I call myself a wandering minstrel. For centuries across the world, and in this country, storytelling has been carried over by generations, centuries, by all these wandering minstrels. They go from one village to another, singing these songs, same songs. Why? How do you think all our epics and these great stories have survived? It's because these unnamed, people out there in villages, in smaller places, are telling these stories constantly, one day after every single day, from one village to another. So one is this. One is when you're talking to. So I'll start with that wandering minstrel thing. The oral narrative is again coming back into a major force. Is when you're doing that, you're actually talking to a very interactive audience. So, if I were to tell a story and I see there are 50 people out there, half of them started yawning. So I know there is something down. Kuch gadbad ho rahi hai, the meter is going down, the draft level is going down. You got to comment out. So you got to suddenly create some melodrama in that thing. You say, oh, wow, suddenly some of them will wake up. That is an interactive possibility. So that's a oral tradition. That's one. Second is when you're writing books. Okay. Writing books, you don't know who's reading it. You don't know at which state of mind a person is, the reader is, she or he is, when she or he is reading your book. And when you need to describe, if I have to describe, let's again go back to my first novel. It's called Evading the Shadows, based in Mahabharata. Now, I am a lover of Mahabharata. And if I were to describe Mahabharata, how do I describe to somebody? I am assuming that somebody would know Mahabharata in India. All of them will know. But trust me, I've been researching Mahabharata for donkey's years now. And when I talk to off-the-cuff research, people invariably know, 5 Pandav hain, 100 Kaurav the, ladai hui hai, Pandav jeet gaye, Kaurav haar gaye. उसके लिए सेकंड लेयर में नाम बताओ तो पांडव के 5 नाम में कई लोग तो 3 नाम बता पाते हैं, होता है, which is a fine thing. They know about it. How do you tell? Because you don't know. You will be talking when your book goes out in the market. There will be a Mahabharata expert who will buy this, who knows intricacies of Mahabharata. There will be a guy who only knows the 5 Pandav the or 100 Kaurav the. There will be another one who doesn't even know Mahabharata. Like my books have gone international as well. So I am assuming that people know Mahabharata. Mahabharata is a known thing, but I'm assuming that they also know only the skeleton of it. So how do you do that? So the first thing you got to do when you come to novel is you describe the entire milieu very clearly. It should be visual like as possible, because there is no possibility of him or her relying on a visual out there. There is no visual there. You're reading ki there is a big palace. So if I were to just describe big palace, you could think about something. Today's generation, your kids have grown up seeing Game of Thrones. They would imagine it like a Game of Thrones palace. Apparently they will, because that's the kind of visual impact that mind has been driven to. They've been conditioned that way. You and I perhaps will see the Mahabharata B.R. Chopra created. But if I were to do that, this is like there's an ornate entrance, and there are intricate details that's been carved. There are statues of damsels standing there. I'm putting more and more into visual effects into trying to create an atmosphere which is like, and then you start understanding. Cut that to film. Film, you don't have to do it. You have to be very cut and dry. You cannot tell. There is no reason why you should say you have to describe these things. But you have to be very cut and dry, because for the same thing, a man is entering a palace. I have to describe the entryway, everything. So it might take me 4, 5, 7 pages, or perhaps even 10 pages. There could be a dialogue with the king. Here, I have just 5-minute scene. A camera follows a man and he sees intricate details and all. The director will say intricate details, mein wo apna director add karke, and then this man is following, and then you cut to whatever the dialogue is with that. That's the basic difference, because you have a basic help of a visual medium out there, which is not there with the book. So you got to understand both these things very, very clearly. Now, even in a book, we always say that if you analyze, why do you say there's also a science behind why there are picture books and all. When you say you start with a kid, the kid doesn't know the words. So initially it's only pictures. We have these bath books and all, kids take to their bathtub, and along with that, they're made of rubberized thing, which doesn't get wet and all. So usme pictures rehte. Now a kid grows up to 2 years, your pictures with certain 1-2 words, which, describing those words, or 3 lines of it where the parent can read it out. But the picture is still important. By the time it grows 5, 6, the ratio of words become much more, picture slowly gets less. By the time it's 7, 8, picture goes much less, words more become. By the time it's 12, when it comes to the novel. So this is a transformation that happens depending on the adaptability of your reader. So you got to know your reader very well. So if you're writing even for a publishing thing, there is a very clear difference of what age group you're writing to. Are you writing to 6 to 7, or are you writing to 10 to 11? There's a great difference in that, because the reading habits change, the mentality changes. So answering your question in a nutshell is because there is always this understanding that's there when you're doing a visual medium, and there is a backup of the visual that's there. So audio doesn't have to be too extrapolated while you're writing a script, unlike when you have to describe the entire thing in a novel. So that's the crux of it, the difference there.
Rajesh, what is your definition of a story? And according to you, what are the elements, that go into making any story?
What attracts? I mean, this is a question that's been thrown at me as an editor. What actually attracts you? When I get manuscripts, and we have to decide on which books to be done and which films to be done. How do you decide? What is that medium? There is no, let me be brutally honest. There is no cut and fast, a way of doing things. There are no rules and regulation to that. It sounds very odd. How do you do that without rule? Because predominantly everything is hard based. It's a very vague structure when you say that what can hit. That's where one of the basic reason when art actually meeting commerce and doesn't succeed is predominantly because somebody's heart is into some story, but that doesn't exactly translate into a commercial value. So the viability of commercial viability might not catch. So to answer your question, but in all these things, one is whether the writer has got the structure right. There's a certain structure. You ask any storyteller, anybody who teaches storytelling, will tell you very, very clearly that it has to have a beginning, middle, and end. That's a standard format. A beginning, middle, and end is very, very important. Has to be there. Goes without saying. But what do you form a good beginning and good end and a good, a middle and a wonderful end is completely hard to me. Somebody, I look at a movie and say, oh God, what have they done? They started on such a good premise and they ruined it completely. But there would be at least perhaps 1 million people out there in the world who say, wow, that's brilliant. So how do you define that? It's very hard to define. Trust me. But then you have to do it. There's a job there. If I'm an editor or a commissioning editor or a creative director, I have to do that. So I do look at one is a very clear structure. Is the structure there or not? One is the structure. That's why we call in editing, there's something called a structure editing. And then it comes a copy editing, then it comes to proofreading. So one is the structure. So in the novel, it's very clear ki structure clear hai ki nahi. Has he got his beginning, middle, and end right or not? I mean, if that is not done, throw it away. There's no way that. Secondly is the copy editing part. Again I'm ascribing more to the books part. Is the writer able to write well? There is a great thought about it. But if the writing is pathetic, if it's just not matching up to what the idea is, and it happens a million times, you realize, wow, you read. But when you read it, it's like a damn script. What has happened to it? Because the writing thing is not there. They're not put in effort as a writer. So that's very important. One is you get a structure right, beginning, middle, and end. Secondly, whether you got the writing basics of writing right or not. Third, what is actually propelling the story? Are the dialogues doing that? Is the description doing that? In both, it can happen in television and script as well. It can happen in books as well. Some of the films that you see are visual films. They're very visually driven. Some of the films you will realize you will only remember through your dialogues only. So Diwar is a brilliant example of doing a wonderful balance between two. Salim Javed had done a great balance between a great screenplay and added it to the wonderful dialogues. And it's not that they're relying. Take some of the dialogues out, Diwar would perhaps still be as good. But just add those Mere Paas Maa Hai and all these things, and it just, boom, it just goes. It's like cake. You prepare a good cake, and the cake itself is eatable. You can eat a cake, and it's good. So screenplay can be good per se. But if you have an icing on the cake, what else can I say? It's an icing on the cake. So you have to have these elements. So from a writer's point of view, from a creative director's point of view, from an editor's point of view, you do realize whether the writer's been able to get all these things right. In all these things, I keep coming back to the hard part. Your heart catches, but you should be in your seat as an editor, as a commissioning editor, as a creative director, as a director. People must be able to understand if the heart is in the right place for the writer also. That's also very important. The writer might be meandering. He's got a brilliant subject. He could be a good writer. There are examples. I have done it myself. There have been, and when you do drafts, do multiple drafts. I do around 10 drafts, sometimes 15 drafts of a novel. You realize, really, I have written this. When you come back after this and you go back to your first draft, second draft, you realize, have I written this? How could I be so callous about this? I didn't look into this. Structure nahi hai. Idea, same idea you're carrying into the 15 draft also. No? But you do realize that something was missing. And that something was the heart missing. So when you realize writer has got a brilliant idea, not necessarily that he's got a heart or she's got a heart. The heart has to be in that story. That is most important. So the heart is the core of it. Around it is creating a wonderful structure. That's most important, beginning, middle, and end. And around it is the way you write. So it's a three-way process. So that three-way process is very, very important that you have to take care of. There are 5 E's that I talk about, in storytelling. That this is very important. So some of these, because it's a completely different program, it's a longer thing that I will get into. But I always realize that emotion is important. So when you look at whether it's able to do that emotional thing. These 2-3 things are very important that they understand that. And there is something called empathy. Is the writer able to empathize with the reader or not? It's a very, very important thing. People don't realize it. It's not just the reader empathizing with the writer. It's also writer has to empathize with the reader also. And a storyteller has to empathize with the listener as well. If he or she, a storyteller, is not able to empathize with the audience, with the reader, miss the bus. Completely miss the bus. So there are times you do realize some of the best writers, what happens? I always not been able to understand. It's just off the cuff research that I've been working on. What exactly happens? But some of the best writers in the world, I wouldn't name anybody. They write their best works, initial works, ek ya do bahut achhe hote hain, and just nosedives. Writing is good. You can't question their writing ability. Structure, they always know the back of their hand, the back of the mind, they know the structure very well, and they adapted the art. What actually happens is the fact they have stopped empathizing with the reader. They are so self-consumed. They realize that hum jo bol rahe hain, that's the end. And that is harakiri for any writer, for any storyteller. So you got to have self-doubt. So they say self-doubt is the most important thing for a writer. Trust me, it is very, very important. So you got to, every time you open your mouth to say something, tell a story, take a pen or start keying on your keyboard. If you have self-doubt, I tell all writers, wow, you take that first step. Don't worry about that. Now, nature will take its own course. It will come. Trust me, if nature has given you the story idea, nature will give you a way to come out of it. So I think that self-doubt has to be there. So from a writer's point of view, from a creative director's point of view, you look at all these things. You look at whether the heart is there, whether empathy is there, whether structure is created, and whether the writing ability is on. So it's a very broader structure, but it goes across medium, whatever you do.
One another very close subject, which is very close to your heart, that is our Chitrakatha. And, Mr. Anand Pai. So you are writing his autobiography. So can you share, one or two stories?
This thought never came to me while I was there. I was a group creative head with Amar Chitrakatha for nearly 4 years. And it never struck me. It never struck anyone that we should be writing Uncle Pai's biography because we were more into domain of comic book. And incidentally, Mrs. Pai would come and visit. I had never, ironically, I've never met Mr. Pai personally. And I joined ACK after he passed away in 2012. And Mrs. Pai would come occasionally, once in 6 months. She would just drop in the office. And she would come and meet, and she would come meet me as well. And she would recount these things, and fondly recount all these great memories that she had. I today kick myself that I even had an inclination, even one iota of one person in my mind, that one day I'm going to write his biography. I would have just asked her, 10 days perhaps gone over to her place and asked her, please tell me all the details. It would have been a treasure chest. Having said that, when I started doing that, when my literary agent actually mentioned, why don't you write this? I actually dismissed it. 2016, I was releasing my first novel and he said, why don't you write his biography? I said, what is there to write his biography? Everything is there in public domain. Everyone knows. So he persisted. In 2019, when he said, why don't you think about it? I said, I still am very skeptical about it. I don't know what is there because he's got a very simple life. There's nothing there. And you don't want to do anything, don't want to write anything just because you're getting some 5 minutes of fame about a man who created such a wonderful thing for your childhood. My best memories of my childhood have been associated with his creation. So, but then I said, okay, let's go along it. And I structured it. When I started meeting the family, and I said, there was such an uncanny resemblance to my own journey with his. I said, look, there's this man who chucked this job, when I was looked down upon by his immediate family and parents. And I said, is this about him or is it about me? Because I have done throughout my life, that's what I've been doing, chucking jobs, chucking well-paid jobs and getting up in corporate ladder. And then one day it's just deciding, chalo chodo yaar, writing hi to karna hai. So I said, what is happening is that, and everything is like going along in that way. But in all these things is that indomitable will that this man had. You cannot beat that thing. So my stories, and just give you an example, my story doesn't end with this entire thing about his birth to end, though we do, because it's a biography, we do talk about his birth and early days and childhood and all. But it comes with how he created this two great iconic Amar Chitrakarta and Tinkle magazine, and how he bounced back way back in 90s when there was a major calamity, which is, I will not be able to divulge right now, but is from that calamity, he bounced back. When everything was done, Amar Chitrakarta had stopped being published, newer titles were not being published, children publishing was on a complete downswing. Tinkle was surviving, but even his own distribution team was not interested in selling children's magazines. You know? They were more interested in selling film magazines, which were working very well. From there to survive, come back, bounce back, when everything, they had a fire. I'll be sharing something you would be aware of. In 94, they had a massive fire. And from that fire, they came back, is what defines what Uncle Pai stood for. Is that, and the entire journey is not easy at all. He's had skirmishes, he had problems, he had financial issues, every kind of issue you can think of. But one steadfast thinking, I had to create this, and he did. And the journey is such a wonderful thing, you know, sprinkled with such beautiful anecdotes, and it gives a very great insight into that person's psyche, and a will. Like I said, it's an indomitable spirit and a will to do, no matter what the adversity is, no matter what it is. And the fact that, and he did it to the T. He taught it. He had his institute as well, wherein he taught young minds. So he used to teach them, and not just something that he just taught. He actually followed throughout his life. You know, everything was very, very meticulously done. He'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He'd do these. You know, everything was like jotted to the planned to the T, like they say. He actually planned it to the T. Things obviously have been working exactly according to his plan all the time. But in most structure, it actually fell to the kind of like outline he had created. So I think that indomitable will is what drove me in all the anecdotes, whether it is from his ex-colleagues, whether the people who he mentored or his relative. So I had to see through this, you know, as a biographer, you got to realize if I talk to somebody who's like been, mentored by him, obviously she or he would say great things about Mr. Pai. But you got to read between the lines. As a biographer, you got to say कि हाँ ये सब चीजें तो बहुत तारीफ कर दी है, but ये हमको बुक में नहीं लेना है. बुक में तो उसके बीच में मिस्टर अंकल पाई कहाँ झांक रहे हैं वो सब पकड़ना है.
Absolutely.
So from there, I could clearly understand that this man, despite all the criticism, I have hundreds of criticism, which I have put certain of them sprinkled in there. I have certain criticism, which is fact. I mean, even if things you love, you do criticize things. It's not a wrong thing. It's actually a healthy thing. So I do have my criticism of ACKs and my criticism of Uncle Pai as well. Certain things I don't agree with it. But overall, when you see the picture, no one can deny the fact, the kind of creation, what he has done, his impact. And the fact that I think, and it's a sad that in a country like ours, he's not been given the due respect. And in somewhere else, I mean, he would have been perhaps, in US, perhaps he would have been equaling a Walt Disney. But sadly, we have not given any single big government recognition, which is a sad thing, which is what intend to do after the book is launched. Create a kind of a movement of sorts, wherein at least give him something, you know, decency, posthumously also, but at least, you know, this man needs to be recognized. Trust me, I'm not saying that he will not have brought their thing. Today, when I'm getting, after the book is complete, it should be released in a couple of months. So I'm getting quotes from people in politics, people in films, and people in sports and everything. Trust me, he has touched so many lives. So many lives. And a lot of people say, हमें तो मालूम ही नहीं था ये सब कहानियां भी हैं करके. And actually, people thought कि भाई Indian ये culture में क्या है, रामायण है, महाभारत है, खत्म कहानी. अरे, that's just the beginning. There's so many stories, and he unearthed those things. You know, just imagine the entire generation which would have perhaps swayed towards the West had we not done that. Absolutely. So I think we owe a big time to him.
So Prasad Rajgopalan is a founder of Stories for Training. Stories for Training is a world's first OTT channel, which is created for presenters, trainers, teachers, where we have 120 plus animated stories, which are based on anecdotes, parables, morals, and one series called as Bollywood se Seekho.
Rajesh, as you were saying, see, human beings are hardwired for stories. And if you want to engage anyone, storytelling is the best way. And
Exactly.
as a film production house, we used to produce short story videos for corporates. They were about 2 minute, 3 minute, and they used to use it during the training, during the briefing. And about a year back, we got this idea. Say at that time, Netflix and the OTT channels were becoming popular, and going forward, OTT channel is the way to go. So we said, like, can we create a OTT channel, so which will have a library of 90-second story-based videos.
Yeah.
So for a presenter, all he has to do is just go there, select a story, play a story, and engage. So it will be the fastest way to become a storyteller. So let me share the channel, and it has a library of 90-second story videos. And we have three categories like presentation, any presenter. He could be a teacher, coach. No, he can use this. Then value education, it's ideal for teachers.
Oh,
And
wow.
Bollywood says Seiko is the best way to bring a smile on anybody's face. So let me play one story.
The modern version of Hare and Tortoise story. Talent can win a single game, but to win a tournament requires teamwork.
तेरा क्या होगा कालिया?
सरदार, मैंने आपका नमक खाया है।
अब गोली खा। जो डर गया समझो मर गया। जो डर गया समझो मर गया। जो डर गया समझो मर गया। जो डर गया समझो मर गया।
सरदार, जो डर गया समझो मर गया।
हैं?
Rajesh, I wanted to ask you, like, how do you think, like, trainers, teachers, no, or people in corporate life can use this channel?
It's a wonderful channel. I mean, whatever I've seen of it, it's a great thing. Again, I have always been reiterating since the time I'm doing off-the-cuff kind of a training thing in Amar Chitrakatha or even earlier as well, is that I've realized that the core of even a training is stories. If you realize now what is happening is, the latest one they start talking about, I'm sure you would have realized last year, Jeff Bezos is said to have sent across a big mailer to all his executives, that we don't want that kind of presentations in pointers. We want a story format kind of a thing. So they do realize the stories are an integral part of a training program. What it does, apart from this thing, and I keep telling everyone this, stories are not about mere entertainment. It is not. Otherwise, you tell me the biggest of all your, the greatest of minds in this world, whether you say Sakyamuni Buddha, whether you say Krishna, whether you say Kabir, when you say Jesus, all of them have told their greatest of philosophies through parables and stories only. Why would they use stories if they're not powerful? It is the most powerful medium. Why shouldn't it be a powerful medium for training? It is the greatest powerful medium for training. And what you're doing is the most wonderful thing. And I think it's in a smaller way, smaller packages, and humor, adding humor to it, getting off the cuff kind of thing. When you added the Bollywood thing, is such brilliant way. When you come from a side, this is like I wanted to, if I were to give an example, this is like a Shane Warne's ball of the millennium. You don't expect it to come and hit you, but it does. Like Mike Gatton never realized it, but it does. The point driven. When you throw a Bollywood story and people might say, "Arey yaar, ye kya hai? To just time pass kar rahe hain kya? Shayad break de rahe hain." But when in the end you realize, oh gosh, you are beaten and you understood the sales philosophy, but you didn't understand in 4 hours. Perhaps you were sleeping through that 4 hours of training, and you understood in perhaps 40 seconds. So I think it's a wonderful medium. It's a great thing that you're doing, and keep up the good work. And I'm sure this is going to go places.
People can go to storiesfortraining.com and subscribe. And the subscription start at just 100 rupees per month and 1000 rupees per year. And we have created a special promo code SFT50, SFT all caps and 50. And you use this promo code and you'll get 50% off.
Okay.
So I would request all presenters who are watching this to go and subscribe to this channel and spread the good word. Thank you.
You have done a lot of writing based on Mahabharata. So, what was the inspiration? What intrigued you?
Mahabharata, I don't know. It's like a quicksand. Better describe it. You step into it, it'll pull you inside. Trust me, it will pull you inside. And inside it lies universes, not just universe, but universes. And I'm just talking about Vedavyasa's version. We don't know there are millions of versions. Your version, my version, and things happening. Every single state has multiple Mahabharats. And each one has added to that. So what Mahabharata we know, 20-30% of it has never been there in Vyasa's version. It's always been interpolated, add and on, and by storytellers like me, storytellers like you. You would have been telling your kid, suddenly you realize that it doesn't add gravitas to that. You add certain element to that. So you add element to characters, you add element to stories, you add element to events and anecdotes. And that's how the Mahabharata formed. That's also the reason, I always reiterate, that's also the reason why epics in this country has survived. And nowhere else, nowhere. Greek mythology has gone for a toss. Nobody, it's except Hollywood doing whatever they are doing with Greek. I mean, they have just tormented it apart, but whatever that is. But the fact is, ours is still living and throbbing and surviving and will continue to do so for centuries to come, predominantly because we live it. We don't just tell stories. One of the greatest things about it is we live those stories. For us, Krishna is not just one character, somebody there. Krishna is there in us. He is breathing within us. How can it not be? How can it be an inanimate object? It cannot be. For Greek mythology, it become inanimate object, because they were inanimate. For us, it's like Krishna is there every single time. When I'm talking to you right this moment, things are happening, So so when you're asking your question, what exactly? So when you stumbled upon, because we all had stumbled upon Mahabharata and Ramayana very early in our life. But when I read that in my 20s and 30s, perhaps around 30s only, is where I realized that there's a world which completely eluded me. And this reading was coming after, let's say, perhaps 10 years or 15 years gap. But what surprised me was, because it had gone into this world, I started reading the multiple versions also. The regional retellings, there are great retellings that's there from Maharashtra, there's great retelling from Odisha, there's great retelling from Indonesia. There's a great Mahabharata that is in Indonesia, which is still very, very throbbing and happening thing in Indonesia. So when I understood that, all have added their life value to that. It's not as if it's a distant thing. It's not as if Pandavas are somebody from outside, Pandavas are part of us. We are Pandavas, or we are Kauravas, or we are Krishna, we are this. It's not as if they, we don't talk in terms of them or that. Hum bolte waqt usko bolte honge, Pandavas hain, Kaurav the, ye the. But identifying happens very, very easily with these characters. And one of the reasons why Mahabharata is also seeped into our collective psyche is that because we see them as mirrors. All of them. We see, now let's cut it down to 5 Pandavas. you will start realizing that you are there. All these characteristics of a Yudhishthir or a Bhim or Arjun or Nakul or Sahdev are there in you. Some part, somewhere it's more of a Yudhishthir, sometimes it's more of a Arjun, sometimes more of a Bhim. But you do realize that they are not characters, they are cut-out characters. कि मतलब distant है, हमने देखा 2 घंटे enjoy किया. So what happens in this is that because it's been created so beautifully by Vyasa and so beautifully added on by wandering minstrels and poets and seers and rishis and all of them, is that they are still breathing life and it's there happening in all. Second thing, when you realize with multiple readings, and this has happened, and this happens when I've started talking to other people who read multiple versions and multiple times also. Even if you read Mahabharata, let's say, assuming that you say, I want to read only the conventional one, is I will be reading, let's say, Kesari Mohan Ganguly. That's the first English version 200 years ago. So if you read Kesari Mohan Ganguly today, and you go back to it 1 year later, trust me, you'll find something completely new. You will say, really? How did I miss this? How could I miss, let's say, Karna's character here? Because I didn't seem to have got that in the first reading. First reading was more from Arjun's point of view, or whatever that is. Second reading, and when you go to the third reading from the same
just hold for
I'm not even
I think you're
saying interpolation, I'm not even saying multiple versions. All I'm saying is it is so layered. That layered storytelling works. It's again predominantly because that layers, what happens is, even if you miss out the first layer, you will have to drop into the second layer. If you miss out the second layer, you drop into the third layer. So this writing is into multiple layers. And when you realize that, this is not one universe in itself. That's why you use the word. I don't know whether that there is anything word called universes, but this is galaxies put together, multiple galaxies. So characterizations are changing, things are changing. And when you do that in a more spiritual and more philosophical way, you start realizing, oh, this is what happens in life. Today, there is no such thing. That's why they say it's about dharma. They say Mahabharata is a dharma. I say something else. In my new book, I have used this term. And that's old philosophers used to use this word. It's called dharma sukshmata. So there's this term in Sanskrit called dharma sukshmata. It's subtleness of dharma. It's not just about dharma. When we say, because our minds are very westernized these days, we say dharma matlab, good is this is bad. No. What Krishna says, what Mahabharata talks about is there is no such thing as good and bad. Every action has good into it and bad into it as well. So let's say an example of we had heard of this example of there's a man who's sitting there and a hunter is chasing a deer, and the deer runs away before this man, and the hunter comes in and says, did you see the deer? He says, no, I didn't. Now, does this man become a good because he saved the deer, or does this man become a bad because he actually lied? And secondly, he lied to a person who was doing his duty. A hunter's duty is to kill, whatever that is, get a thing. Today's point of view, we might say, oh, he's at least killing a human, killing life, but the fact is, he's actually doing his duty. There are people to be fed, his family to be fed. He's doing a duty. So how do you define this? Would you call this a good act in today's world? I think we would all say, wonderful, he actually saved the deer, even if he lied. But you cannot deny the fact that he actually denied perhaps a full course meal of the entire family by that lie. So it's when we say one act is good or one act is bad is where we fall into this pitfall. It's a very mind-driven thing when you say that. So Mahabharata is all about understanding the sukshmata or subtlety of dharma. Dharma is basically very intrinsic, very tight. Like Krishna says, it's, gahano, he says, gahan hai, bahut deep hai. It's very deep. It's very hard to understand. So don't get too deeper into it and try to understand it, but understand the fact that's not easy. It's not cut and dry. It's not black and white. It's not good and bad alone. It's all intermingled together. So Mahabharata is that. I think it's that complexity that makes you go back to Mahabharata time and again. And you don't realize it. People don't realize it. I might not realize it. But subconsciously, something strikes you. it's because that subtleness is there. It's that subtlety is there. It's that layers after layer is there. So that's why I'm saying, if the first layer doesn't catch you as a story, as say, "Arey yaar, ye story to bahut bare hai. पांच पांडव हैं, 100 कौरव लड़ाई कर रहे हैं. It's all about greed. It's all about land. A lot of people say, extrinsically it looks about fight for land. जमीन की लड़ाई है ना बॉस, कि हमको जमीन नहीं दिया, तुमको जमीन दिया. Why should people, the entire universe, come together and fight for these two families, fighting across among themselves, two set of cousins? But that's on the topper layer. Below that is something else. Below that is about right and wrong, at least from the societal point of view. Much below that is to maintain the dharmic balance. Much below that. So there are layers there. So in each of these retellings, you will realize that the layers are getting deepened and deepened and deeper. So the love for Mahabharata, once you enter that world.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you.
Yeah.
I actually realized, I was just thinking, when we spoke, like for me, my first confrontation with Mahabharata was with the novel Mrutyunjay from Shivaji Savant.
Shivaji Savant.
Yeah. And then it was like, it was a fiction. And then I went to Yugandhar. Then I came across Maharshi Vyasa's Mahabharata. And then there are some similarities, but then I could understand that more. Then, contemporary writers like Devdutt Patnaik, now they are using Indian mythology. And now you are also touching upon, when you spoke about Dharma Sukshmata, it actually, it has got huge meaning. There is a difference between Dharma and Dharma Sukshmata. Now,
exactly.
now, what you are creating out of all this, what you are creating actually.
So I am from the story point of view, again I'll talk from layers.
Yeah.
From Mahabharata, when I write, the first novel was in Mahabharata. My fifth novel, the recent one, is on Mahabharata, again based on Karna. It's a fictionalized interpretation of last 4 days of Karna. So I'm imagining how Karna what is the turmoil that must have gone into his head. I'll start with how I started. I look into the stories in between the lines, read between the lines. So we know the entire story. Ye hua, unme ladai hui, they played the game of dice, they lost it, went to 12 years of exile, 13th year incognito. I realized there is a story out there in the 13th year, which is Agyatwas. And Vyasa has not touched upon it. It's the smallest thing. Virat Parv is the smallest Parv. It's a very small thing. But he mentions in so many words that all 6 were, 5 and Draupadi 6, were in different disguises. So one becoming Sairandri, another becoming Brenala, and so on and so forth. And hundreds of Kaura spies were hunting them. Now, my brain started ticking. It's not possible that 365 days, if they were hiding, they would not have had skirmishes jahan par they would have come very close to a Kaura spy. What had happened, perhaps, Yudhishthir, in the guise of a Kanka, comes very close to a spy, or Draupadi in the guise of Sairandri, comes very close to a spy. So the spy thriller came.
For that matter, Ballav, he's so huge, he's
exactly
easily noticeable.
And there are certain things which I don't agree with. Even from a Vyasa point of view, I say, when he beats Jimuta, there's this thing wherein he fights there's a fight that happens, organized by the king Virat. Why would you do that? I thought because the moment you beat somebody, invincible guy like a Jimuta, a fighter like him, the spies will get to know Kaura spies. It's harakiri. It's a suicidal thing to do. So I said, how do you keep that? Because it's a great part of it. You can't do away with the story. So what do you do with that? So I weaved the fictional things around how it happened, how Bhim had to was forced into doing that, and how they came out of it. So answering your question, one is taking these smaller stories. So nobody talks about the 13th year. 13th year, Vyasa also didn't talk about because he had Great War coming in. So he said, perhaps the Great War will do the talking there. So I said, there is an interesting story there. And I put in my philosophies and my thoughts and my storytelling into that. Yet the backdrop is real, the characters are real. Now come back to my second novel, which is a recent one, is when I started writing. So I written an author's note. I'll perhaps send you the book as well. So I was inspired, like you, I had read Shivaji Savant in both Hindi as well as in Marathi. And I didn't read in English because I didn't like it in the English translation. I always felt that they just couldn't do justice to it. Sorry for the translation, but yeah, but whatever that is. Because I had read it in Marathi and Hindi as well. So I said, what could be? I have also read Ranjit Desai's Radhe. So I said, क्या और लिख सकते हैं? मतलब इतना लिखा गया है कर्ण पे इतनी कहानियां गई है. Then I started imagining, and the story started coming. So my book is last 4 days of it. It is based on the entire discussion between Shalya, who was his charioteer on the last day, and Karna. So I will do the metaphor for you. So that again, when we are talking about layers, see, Mahabharata on one layer is a great story. It's ripe with metaphor. One metaphor for this, Karna का हमको सबको मालूम है शायद. Karna का मतलब होता है कान होता है. Karna means कान. Okay, कर्ण फूल बोलते हैं जो हम लोग ये कान के जो पहनते हैं. Karna. Karna means कान. So on one side is you have somebody who's such a great archer, but वो कान से impacted है. You know, कान का कच्चा हम लोग हिंदी में बोलते हैं. You know, see, if you are impacted by कान, you will be troubled. On the other side is a great warrior, Arjun. Arjun का एक और है. I have used one of his recent, old, lesser known names, is when you do Sandhi Vichhed of his name. If to Hindi, you know.
Sandhi Vichhed, yeah.
Marathi and Hindi both. So, Ariju hota. Riju matlab steadfast. Ariju matlab wavering. So, Arjun is on one side is actually a wavering mind. Great Dhanurdhar on one side, wavering mind. Great Dhanurdhar archer on another side, who is Kaan ka kacha. Led by whom? Even if you are not steadfast and wavering mind, but if you are led by the Lord, who controls that 5 horses or the 5 senses, you will still win, no matter what. On the other side is a man who is Kaan ka kacha. Now Shalya, coming back to Shalya. Lesser name known of Shalya is doubt. So बोलते हैं कि कान से सुनी बात शक क्रिएट करती है, शक पैदा करती है. कितना भी धनुर्धरी हो, he will waver because mind is impacted by these things. आप सुनते हो किसी की बात, अरे. So when I tell this story to somebody who's like, we were talking about young aspiring writers. So this is a great story. You could be a Karn or you could be an Arjun. You could have great talents. But if you listen to somebody telling you, अरे यार तुम में कोई talent नहीं है, काय को लिख रहे हो, क्या जरूरत है, इसमें कुछ नहीं होने वाला, you will die a death, definitely. But if you say, I have talent, I surrender unto life, let it take course. If life has given me that talent, life has also given me a way to it. You will succeed, no matter how long does it. So
that's where that your prayer comes.
Yeah, that's where the prayer comes. Wonderfully. So this is what the metaphor is. So your answer, coming back to your larger question, is one, getting these stories from within this larger story of kings fighting and whatever for a kingdom, is the smaller stories between them, and coming out with little nuggets and elevating it to the level which is understood by the newer generation. So that in nutshell is what my love for Mahabharata.